So at Tufts University, the goal of our lab is to study what goes right in the lives of children. We mostly work with youth programs. We have a couple partnerships in the United States, including with like 4-H, which is the largest youth-serving organization in our country, Boy Scouts, West Point, and we have been building, mostly in partnership with Compassion International and with TWCF, our international partnerships. So that's part of what we're going to talk about today is our partnership with Compassion. I would also like to say for my role in most of these partnerships, I'm kind of the liaison between the program team and the research team. Jonathan is very heavily researched and incredible writer, and I'm kind of the liaison between the sciencey people and the program people. I would also like to say that we are so thankful to Compassion for this relationship we've had with them. Emmanuel kind of feels like family to me at this point. When he met my daughter today, it's like he wanted to hug her because he had heard so much about her. So we truly value our partnership with Compassion International. I had this experience of like, I'm now meeting the strongest woman I'll probably ever meet in my life, knowing fully well that probably hundreds of thousands of women survived similar things to what Shakira Martin survived. But she passed away a couple months after we met her. And I got to meet her daughter yesterday, and kind of with her permission, we are kind of dedicating our work moving forward to Martine. So with that, I'm going to send it off to John.
I'll note if there's any chance we can get a second microphone that might facilitate a lot of the conversation, they'll work on that. But by means of continuing the introduction, or just we're in the throes of the session now, one reason why I asked if there were any funders in the room, other than the obvious reason, because we always need more funding, is that a lot of this work is funded by the Templeton Philanthropies. This gathering is funded by a grant that we got from the Templeton World Charity Foundation, the Templeton Religion Trust, and the John Templeton Foundation has supported a lot of our work over the years. And the reason why I think the Templeton Philanthropies have been such a good fit for a lot of our research practitioner partnerships is because of what Sir John described as the humble approach. And to set the tone for our discussion on research and practice partnerships, I want to talk a bit about the humble approach. So we've seen a lot of researcher practitioner partnerships fail, a lot of them be duds, a lot of them not be mutually beneficial or mutually serving. And the reason for that is perhaps I would describe as a lack of humility or a lack of kind of staying in each other's lanes. This is not our session. If you're looking for this session, you're in the wrong room. I apologize. This is a step up, though. A few minutes ago, we were hearing next door out of these speakers. So why do these research practice partnerships fail? A few different examples around the theme of the humble approach. So one is that there's the temptation for relationships to be transactional. A partner, a program practitioner organization might, it's going in and out, might see researchers as maybe token academics. Oh, you can come in, you can give us the evaluations, and then we can use that evaluation to improve our programs. Or alternatively, and what we see a lot, especially being a researcher myself, there's been decades of what they call parachute research or something like that, where parachuting, where these Western and global North academics swoop into a context, collect all the data from the community, fly back out and analyze the data collected, build a career on it, and it never benefits the community that they were partnered with or that they were partaking in. So compared to being transactional, where different partners are seen for their titles or their roles or their responsibilities, one side expects the other to deliver the program and provide the data, the other expects to provide the reports, etc. Being relational is really important. So taking that humble approach of being relational, Sir John Templeton described how education is never complete, or learning, I should say, is never complete. Anywhere you are, you can learn more to improve your life and the lives of others. And it's really a matter of mutual learning from one another, which enables a building of trust. It takes time, but you build trust. Elizabeth, do you want to reflect on that?
So in our partnership with Compassion International, it has actually been a 9, almost 10-year long partnership. We were going to be working in 3 different countries. One is El Salvador, Rwanda, and originally it was going to be a country in Asia, but at the time we were doing the study, the countries they work in, it wasn't working out in Asia. So we happily were told that the 3rd country was going to be Uganda. So we've been working since 2015 with Compassion when Alistair Sim, who's part of their monitoring and evaluation team, approached Richard Lerner, who is the director of our lab, and said, we think we've been doing the PYD model, which is the positive development model, in our programming for years. We say we're doing that, but we actually don't have any science to prove it. Is there any way you would want to partner with us? And Rich kind of saw it as the great capstone to his career. He was so excited because he had never done true international work before. I wasn't even at the lab. I got trained by him for my doctorate, so he asked me to come back specifically for the Compassion Project. And then Jonathan was getting his doctorate at the time, and he stayed on specifically because of the Compassion Project. So we were all very much focused on, like, this is something that we're all here to do. And so trust was like an easy entry for us. But so Jonathan, when you talk about building trust, what does that actually look like? And then I'll go to Emmanuel. What does that look like when you're a research team coming from the global north, working with a team that's from the global south?
Sure, thank you. Sorry, Emma, to keep passing over you. So, good question, Elizabeth. I'm so glad that you asked. We, as a developmental scientist, I'll frame it in the approach that a developmental scientist would take, and I'll preface it by saying, as Rich Lerner, our mentor and advisor, would say, there's the way that people write about doing research, the textbooks that you read, the structures, the frameworks, then there's the way research actually gets done. And as the great 20th century American philosopher once said, in theory, there's no difference between theory and practice, but in practice, there is. That was Yogi Berra, for those at all familiar with Yogi Berra, maybe not the right audience. But in any case, to talk about this theory of change, the way that we get to know each other and build the trust in a program is to try and, like I said in my remarks yesterday, if some of you were there, seeking first to understand rather than to be understood. We want to understand what the program is hoping to do, what change are they trying to affect, and what is their method for doing so. We use the language of theory of change, and a lot of programs have theories of change, some in the form of logic models, and some may be informed by kind of broader theory or by evidence. As developmental scientists, the approach that we take in situating this kind of process relational paradigm, which I'll talk about, is 3 steps for any program evaluation, for any developmental science. The first is describe, the second is explain, and the third is optimize. All programs hope to optimize some kind of outcomes, whether it's promoting hope or promoting forgiveness and peace building. You cannot optimize any of those outcomes without first explaining how those outcomes come to be, explaining the relations among the variables, let's say. And you cannot explain those relations and how that works without first describing what is actually being done. So before I pass it to Emma, to Emmanuel, to describe the compassion programs and what their approach is, to give some examples. In developmental science, we talk about the individual and the context, and most importantly, the relations among them. With the individual has characteristics that define them. For instance, in compassion, they're really interested in promoting hope and in promoting spirituality and promoting agency or intentional self-regulation, goal setting, the ability to set goals and make progress toward them. There's also the context that has its own characteristics. Working with compassion, we describe the big 3, which I'll perhaps reflect on a bit later after Emma describes the programs. And then there's the relations between them. Because every context differs and every individual differs, every relation for every individual will also differ. So there has to be a very careful approach in regard to drawing conclusions or evaluating a program. the example we give is that you can take a bunch of scores from a group. We can take an average score of this room of everybody's forgiveness. That average will not describe any single individual in this room. So you lose a lot of information and a lot of data, a lot of learning when we take this average-based approach, which we'll get back to when we probably discuss methods and measures. But the developmental science approach, the individual, the relation, the context, and the relations among them. Emma, why don't you tell us a bit about what we learned from Compassion's approach to your programs?
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Like I said before, I'm Emmanuel Namrinda. I work with Compassion International Rwanda country office. Maybe to give you a little bit of a kind of a background on what Compassion is. Compassion is an international child development organization. Currently, we work in 31 developing countries, 12 in Africa, 12 in Latin America, and 7 in Asia. The international head office are in Colorado Springs in the US. So we basically work through the partner sponsorship model. And our programs are implemented through churches, local churches within the community. Currently in Rwanda, we're working with over 450 churches. And these churches are distributed across the country. There is no district, there is no sector in this country that we don't have a project ongoing. So working through that sponsorship models, through the church, beneficiaries are selected through the church, and then they are connected to sponsors, and then other programs come along that line. So through this partnership, I want to say something. Steve Jobs said that customers don't measure how hard you tried. They measure you on what you have delivered. So however much you try, as long as what you're doing is not having a significant impact, to them that doesn't make sense. What makes real sense is what touches them. And so that brings me to the reason why we need partnerships. Why do we need partnerships? Basically, there are some specific skills that we need to collect the right data, analyze the right data, and get to understand the basic needs of the people. So that's why Compassion Leadership came into partnership with Tufts University, because these people, they are all PhD holders, they are doctors. They have all these skills that probably for us at Compassion, we don't have. And so when we come into partnership with them, they're able to bless us with those skill sets that we don't have. And that puts us in a position where we are able to reach the needs, the exact needs of our program participants. Specifically, one example I want to draw from what he has just mentioned about the big three, the Richard Lerner's big three. One of them is that for youth to thrive, they need to have a constant relationship with an adult. Basically, for them to thrive, there is need of an adult involvement in their lives. And that has been an eye-opener for us at Compassion throughout all the church partners that we work with. And through that, most of them are now connected to mentors. Even those that come from families that are broken, that are orphans, there is an involvement of an adult in their lives. And that is so instrumental in their growth, in their development, and that contributes a lot for them to thrive. I'll be talking much more. Maybe I can return back to you, to Elizabeth. Thank you.
Thanks, Emmanuel. One of the things I wanted to circle back on is in the conversation about trust and looking at a theory of change, it's as much relationship building is as much for our team, for the researchers, as it is for our partners. So we deeply need to understand the theory of change if we're going to do good research. And that takes time, and that takes sitting in rooms together, going to project sites, seeing it in person, coming back and asking about it. So one of the reasons we were hoping some funders were in here is because we firmly believe that good science needs to be given the time it takes to build trust so that the scientists truly understand the context. And sometimes that trust building piece is not part of your funding proposal. But we really want to push the funders to understand that to have equitable partnerships that result in good, reliable data that will impact programs, we need more time to build the trust and to understand the theory of change. One of the other things you spoke about is being evidence-based, which Compassion has always had a really strong commitment to. So I wanted to ask both of you, maybe Jonathan, you first, like when you think about trust and evidence-based, like how do you bring those things together? What's, in addition to theory of change, what would be the next step?
Is this the part where we talk about measures? Okay, thank you. So we mentioned the humble approach, right? It's tempting, maybe historically, like I alluded to at the start, that Northern researchers come in with their frameworks, their measures, their methods, their models, in getting to know Compassion's programs and in learning that they were the reason that Alistair reached out to Richard Lerner. It started because Richard Lerner wrote quite literally the textbooks on developmental science and on positive youth development. So it started with a cold email from Alistair saying, I come from Compassion International. Our programs have been really ideologically based, faith-based, but we want to make sure we have a strong theoretical underpinning and that we are making data-informed decisions. Faith-based program can still be evidence-based, can still be informed by the data, can still make data-driven decisions. Are you willing to have a conversation? I mentioned the temptation of coming from the global north. When we learned that Compassion's interested in things like hope and spirituality, there could be plenty of measures out there. Another example is the 5 C's of positive youth development. It's a model that describes competence and confidence, connection and character and caring. This is a model that's developed among rural 4-H program participants in the US in the 1990s and into the 2000s. Very useful model. When you develop these 5 C's, it promotes thriving. Do those 5 C's apply in a global South context? Does it apply in Rwanda as much as in the US or even in El Salvador and all these different contexts? So in taking this time to really understand in this study, the Compassion International study of positive youth development, what does thriving look like in this specific context? So this brought us to measure development. I described earlier the 3 steps of describe and then explain and then optimize. In order to describe, we need to what we'd call operationalize. How can we measure this construct that we cannot see? We can take a tape measure to get someone's height. We can take a thermometer to get someone's temperature, a scale for someone's weight. There's no scale for someone's hope or spirituality or forgiveness. We hope that we can gather information that would inform what those are within an individual. So with learning about Compassion's programs, we did some very intentional measured development work. For instance, the big 3 that Emma mentioned, we found that programs that are effective in promoting positive youth development promote 3 key features. The one is mentorship, adult-youth relationships. Number 2 is life skill building activities, learning how to collaborate, how to set goals and work toward them, maybe even vocational skills, entrepreneurial skills. And then number 3 is opportunities to contribute to and to lead valued activities. This was a core part not only of the developmental science literature, but also of Compassion International's programs. No such measures existed. There was no existing measure to assess whether those big 3 were being implemented and how well they were being implemented or how youth perceived those characteristics being present. So we went through a process of collaboratively developing items that youth would respond to regarding their perceptions of the program. Excellent. And then we went through kind of what I describe as the statistical pyrotechnic work, all the fancy fireworks of structural equation models and latent modeling, this validation work to assess the validity and the reliability, the invariance of these measures. And that is one brick, it's one small step toward building this empirical foundation that's informed by the theory that aligned both with developmental science and with the theory of change of Compassion International. So taking this initial step toward developing the measures, we're going to put Mark Wamaka on the spot shortly to describe the burgeoning Aegis Trust Partnership. But with Aegis Trust and with our partnership at Tufts, we're interested in forgiveness and the Aegis Trust model of promoting critical thinking and empathy and personal responsibility and these values. The first step necessarily is describing. We need to be able to describe what the phenomenon is. Once we can describe it, we can take a step toward being able to measure it. When you can measure it, you can then try to explain it. That's step 2, explaining the relations. And once those relations can be explained, you can identify the gaps, you can identify the strengths, and you can tailor the programs based on those results to really fill the gaps and capitalize on the strengths.
I just want to add to that. So we had created together, co-created a survey, right? Then we sent it back and forth between Emma's team and our team. Are these the right questions? These the right items for these measures? And Jonathan and I came for a week to make sure we, as best we could in a week to understand the context. We had it translated and back translated. We did all those great things. And we came to train the data collectors who are independent data collectors. We're like, this will take a couple hours. So we had 12 data collectors from Rwanda, local, I think they were university students. It took us a day and a half. Because in Kinyarwanda, I guess there's little tiny twists of words might mean different things. Different data collectors thought different words meant different things. It took, Angel's nodding over there, she's like, It took us a day and a half. And we did it again when we came back for another wave a year later. We met with the data collectors, we went through each item. This is what we think it means, is this what it says? And again, getting clarification to make sure these measures mean something in Rwanda.
So just to button that up with a reflection, not only is it not a matter of don't take the global north measures without sensitively adapting them, something, okay, we translated them to the local language, we're good to go. Oh no, we need to back translate them to make sure that the translation was correct. Even that was still not enough. We still needed the local team that were familiar with the youth in the context to really go through the wordsmithing. One example, before we go back to Emma, we had, Rwanda was a very Christian country, and we had this item about youth spirituality. I forget exactly what it was trying to get at. The word that was used that passed through the translation procedure and through the back translation procedure, we had all the trained data collectors, in the piloting, the youth were scoring really low on this item. This one item in this massive data set. Like, why are we seeing such low scores here? We're not understanding. It doesn't fit with the rest of the scale. It doesn't fit with the rest of what we understand of the context. It turns out that there was one item that instead of referring to one's faith, it was to the effect of asking whether they wanted to join the clergy. But the tiniest little nuance, instead of assessing, like, I want to apply my faith in my life, it somehow got mixed up into, I want to be a pastor or a preacher or a priest. And of course, if you mix that into an average score and try and make conclusions about it, there's no validity there. And that's one item of a huge survey. We really need to take that time and that care of item by item. What was supposed to be a 2-hour Saturday morning training turned into the full 8 hours that day, and then half of the next day going item by item to really make sure that we were capturing data that is rich and that is valid and that is reliable. You got a question for? Oh, you got the microphone.
I think to add very precisely on what he has just said about developing those tools and making sure they align to the context in which you're working in. To the Rwandan context, it's quite, you really need to be sensitive when you are conducting surveys around here. For example, there are specific questions you don't ask. Questions about race, about tribes. Those are the things that you need to dig down and eliminate them and go to the strategic matter that you are really investigating. So that is why some of these partnerships are important. And like he had said, the Global North researchers coming here doing the things and then going back without the local people being involved. These are some of the errors that they make and come up with programs that are completely irrelevant. So when you have such partnerships, that is when you come up with specific programs that address the exact need. Number one, they are culturally appropriate, they are politically acceptable, and then they are contextually utilized by the people that you want to reach out to. So that is why partnerships are very important. Much as they share the skills that we don't have, there is also another aspect of skills that they don't have that they need us to share with them. That is why partnerships are important. And then I want to specifically highlight on the importance of evidence-based practices that us as Compassion we are promoting so much. We do a holistic child approach programming. By holistic, we mean that we cover the totality of the person, and that is why our programs are run through churches. And along that line, there comes into a place where you come across sections you need to address for you to be holistic that you don't have the skills for. And so for you to be really effective on the ground, you need a combination of all this. I think I will come along that line again as we continue the discussion. Thank you.
So just as I said, you need time to really get to know a theory of change. You need time to do measure development. So when our suggestion is when you're writing a proposal, if you can, have a conversation with the funders about this fact, that you want to have measures that are ecologically valid for the community you're working in, and it's going to take time. We don't want to just accept this measure that somebody used in some other study that was also studying forgiveness. It takes time. So we would recommend to push back or work with your funder to help them understand that that's the truth. So then the other piece of what we do is developmental science, as Jonathan said. So I'm going to ask it back to Jonathan about, like, when you say development, what does that mean in terms of research? How do you measure development?
Good question, Elizabeth. I'm so glad you asked. So development basically just means change over time. It's a process that in some instances, oh, that feels really nice. The AC just turned on. Oh no, I spoke too soon. So development is change over time, and programs, as any educator, any practitioner knows, is that change takes time. There may be instances of transformational change. We've heard of some of those at this weekend where there's that moment, maybe 10, 17 years in some cases after a trauma, where something happens and you experience that emotional release, or that emotional forgiveness that Ev talked about in the last session. Transformational change still relies on a preface or a lead up to, let's say, change over time is what development occurs. So to assess change over time, that requires a design that is longitudinal. And I can get deep into the weeds for some of the researchers here that there are several ways to do longitudinal research. The typical approach is, let's say, assessing a group once a year for 3 years. Once a year because there's something magical seemingly about one rotation around the sun. I'm speaking facetiously. There's an arbitrary division of the x-axis, as we call it. Some changes might occur in days, some weeks, some years. It's a developmental question. We say 3 points of time because statistically that enables us to look at moderators and mediators. We can say, yes, A predicts B, but is there a third variable? Having a third wave allows us to model that. Again, getting too into the weeds, maybe for a specialized session just on methods. The point is that for the part 2, explaining, first we describe by developing these measures and collecting data that we can ensure or that we can trust are valid and reliable. To explain the relations among those data or the relations among the constructs that those data are intended to represent takes a developmental design. So I alluded earlier how taking a group average does not necessarily reflect any one individual in that group. There is value in these designs if you take an average in this room and then an average in the next room, and if you see on average whether one group benefited from this session more than they benefited from the other session. There might be something there, but that doesn't mean that some people are way above that average, some people way below, some people may be negatively affected. That brings to the fore questions of different kinds of longitudinal designs. For instance, yesterday, for those of you that heard some of my remarks, I described the 3 truths about being human, the 3 approaches to studying human development. There's the universal approach, how everyone's like everyone else. There's the group differential approach, how everyone's like some people. How men respond might be different from how women respond, for instance, how one culture is different from another. And then there's the idiographic approach, or the person-specific approach, where because of the technology we have now in our hands, which again can be a whole other session, but having the tools to collect data and the software to do advanced statistical analyses, we can do intensive longitudinal designs where each person becomes their own data set. So you can track one person over the course of days or weeks with the right questions, with the right description model, and assess whether that person is benefiting from the program. So Compassion International, for instance, is building some of the tools to look at that individual and regional and country-specific approaches. What else? Am I rambling?
Do you have anything to add, Emmanuel?
Yeah.
I basically want to highlight more on why some of these partnerships are important and the importance of data into programming. I think as we do programs and reach out to the people that we minister to, it's important that the decisions or the interventions we design are data informed. Because that's specifically when we will have the impact or the outcomes that we desire. The thing of programming on assumptions, I assume these people want this. So you design an intervention and take, I believe this works here. No, there is nothing like working or programming on assumptions, on beliefs. No, you need to have data that specifically informs every intervention that you design, that you implement. And then as you do that, it's important that the first thing you do, you assess, you plan, you implement, you monitor, and you evaluate. And when you do such kind of a cycle, there is a high probability of you having impact and achieving the outcomes. So in order to do all that, it's important to have data. And with that data, there's certain kind of information that you may not have or have the specific skill sets for you, for your organization, to be able to achieve that, to arrive on that conclusion. And that is why you need different people with different skills, and that's the importance of partnerships like this. Thank you.
Okay, I think we're going to transition now to our burgeoning partnership with Aegis.
Yeah, I'll do one introduction for that first, unless
Okay,
you have a comment.
I just wanted to
Go
say
ahead.
one thing. This conference is like making my brain explode. And the session with the gentleman from the ICTR, when he says to his students, come in with 50% of what you think you know, get rid of it. And that spoke to me so much because I thought that's, as scientists, what we need to do when we're working with partners, right? Like, you think you know what might be happening, you have assumptions, and you know your science, but 50% of what you're going to learn, 50% of what matters, maybe even more for this partnership, is what Emmanuel knows, right? Is what Mark knows, is what Freddie knows, is what Martine and Albert and all the people we've met who are connected to Aegis Trust. We are here to learn from them. They are the experts. We have the science and can facilitate that learning, but we are not the experts. So from the scientist's perspective, that's very much how we operate. Like, enter in with 50% of your brain free or more to learn. And now I'll pass it to you to introduce our new partnership.
Yeah, well said. So far in this session, we've very rapidly and briefly touched on description. How do you describe what a program is trying to do and the intended outcomes? How do you develop a theory of change that's describing that process? Then we briefly touched on explanation. How do you do this research designs, the longitudinal designs to understand development, to understand the relations among those constructs? talking about evaluating and scaling a program, to plug some part of the title that I'm sure scaling was in there. That's number 3, the optimization component. Describe, explain, optimize.
So just like Jonathan said, first of all, let me talk about building relationships, because that's where you guys started from. And this starts from a time when, it was around COVID time, and everyone is in the house, and we had enough time to be on email. If you remember, I'm looking at Freddie, we used to have those meetings at night, and you'd be having meetings at 7, and in the evening. And for some reason, I'm not good with LinkedIn, but for this reason, someone writes to me, and then I started responding, and then we build a relationship. And then eventually we start thinking, okay, so what do we do? And then we talk about that. Then I take it to Freddie. I tell him there's this person who did this and this and this. And he's like, oh, that's a good idea. And then he asked me if I could share the emails, and then I share the emails. So we're building relationship in between that, and eventually it builds trust. And when it comes to our work, he talked about some humans are humans like the others, and da-da-da-da. And there are things that people say, and all of a sudden you ask yourself, wow, I never thought about this. Even in our programming, how we're doing things, how do we do that? So with the building of relationship also comes knowledge sharing, and from knowledge sharing, you find that the other party has deep desire to learn, you have deep desire to learn, and Aegis is one of those organizations that is looking for, being a growing organization that collects data, and then from that data we learn from it so that we can keep on programming better. And through that, you start talking and realizing, oh, we need this and this and this. Now, this one time when they came here, took them through our programs, this is what we do, but we said, you know what, some of our impact has been that the young people that we train, the teachers that we train, the decision makers that have gone through our programs, the parents that have gone through our programs, they go back and do programs that bring impact in their own community. So like, oh, why don't we visit some of those? Like, okay, so we can visit this, we can visit this. We can also visit a reconciliation village. And they're like, okay, so let's go to the reconciliation village. And when we get to the reconciliation village, you can imagine, so this is what happens to me. When I'm translating, I usually don't take time to think about what people are saying. So I just become like a vessel where two people are interacting. But within me, I'm not really thinking about what they're saying. And then I can see that what the conversation is going on is impacting these people, right? And these people are impacted by what's going on in the reconciliation village. And then, you find they have built a relationship with them, and then they want to follow up. They even go beyond just the research, but also building relationships so that they can go deeper. And when I get back in my place where I'm sleeping, now the stories that have been told start impacting me myself. Because now they are no longer stories of other people that I'm telling. They have become also part of my consciousness. And now I'm dealing with my traumas even when I'm with myself. But also realizing the kind of work that we do, which is the work to help in the healing, but also to disarm the hearts and minds so that people cannot keep on having conflict. So to me, the partnership brings in that aspect of relationship, but now it goes into the real work. How do we create tools, and then the back and forth, and then we're like, okay, let me come and see what you do in your area, and then since you've come to see, then we understand each other, because I understand the context within which you work, you understand the context within which I work, then it's easy for us even to create better tools that are going to speak what you want to get from there, and also for me to give you the actual data that you're looking for. And then with that, we bring in Diane. I didn't tell her I would say her name in our PML, and then we look at the data, we look at the data that was collected before, and then how do we share that, which is also trust that we can give even the data that we had collected before for you to analyze it. I don't know if I'm answering the question or rambling. I'm doing great. Yeah. So to me, it would be that part of the trust, but also what we're building and what we're looking for. And I hope as this is a 3-year project. Maybe after that we even build on to go deeper into our programs and expand them.
Yeah, I'll reflect on that last point. As Mark said, it was during COVID when I reached out to him. The relationship building researcher-practitioner began then, even without the formal structure of a partnership. We were respectively hopeful as we got to know each other's interests and passions and work that we could find that formal structure. It was 2 years of relationship building, like I said, sharing stories. When he was in the States, he would come to Tufts and to Harvard and give some lectures on his work. When we were visiting our Compassion International partners, we would come to see them at Aegis Trust and at the Memorial. That relationship building of 2 years paved the way for the formal grant, which, like I said, even though it's 3 years, that's still in the description phase. We're spending these next 2.5 years now to learn deeply and qualitatively about the Aegis programs, the Peace and Values education programs, revisiting some of the beneficiaries from years past to learn how they've really adopted the lessons, learning from the community members that their trainees return to see if the impact was really taking place. And from all those stories and those learnings, start to figure out what the right questions to ask might be. And so taking their existing tools, the existing data, like Mark mentioned, adapting and enhancing them with what we can draw from our developmental science, from our theory, and from the findings from the qualitative work, and then doing the first kind of measure validation steps, the measurement model validation, developing these new surveys and doing those statistical pyrotechnics. One thing I like to say to really ruffle the feathers of any researchers in the room is that there's often a desire to use validated measures or previously validated measures. There's no such thing. There's no such thing as a validated measure. In that, validation does not exist in the words on a page. It's not that the item itself is valid. Validation and other psychometric properties exist in the relationship between the sample and that measure. So it's a sample that shows validity. So one way to put it, a measure that's developed in the 1990s with 18 to 22-year-old college students in a Midwestern white university, psychology students even, let's say, which is a lot of psychology measures that I was trained on, might be valid with that sample at that time in that context. You take that same measure to 2024 Rwanda at a different context, different age, that measure is probably not valid, or at least some work needs to be done to show that it's valid. So there are validation steps that are taken. Psychometric properties don't exist in a measure itself, it exists within a sample. And so that kind of really intentional work needs to get done. And so, like I said, ruffle feathers, no such thing as a validated measure. I've worked on so many grant proposals and advised proposals that think that they are like, I mean, that I'm trying to be controversial, so forgive me. But people put a lot of emphasis on, we found validated measures, but the measure was validated 20 years ago in a different context with a different sample. There needs to be work to make sure that it's relevant with the present sample. So with that, okay, Elizabeth.
Do you all remember Mark's activity last night when we were on the stage and he said he gave us all a piece of paper and we had to role play somebody? So I was a perpetrator who had been in prison for 5 years. And having been to the Reconciliation Village 2 times and having a specific perpetrator in my mind who I think his story needs to be told, I kept thinking, this is just one data point, Mark. And that's just one data point about Nassan, right? That he went to prison. He's a perpetrator and he went to prison for 5 years. What is the rest of his story? What is his testimony? That is how we understand Nassan. That's how we understand his development, right? To hear his testimony, to document it, that won't be Jonathan and my job to collect a testimony of someone like Nassan and figure out how he's changing. It will, our partnership will be, how can we measure this change? How can we work in partnership with Aegis Trust so that we can capture Nassan's story, we can capture the lessons learned from his change from a perpetrator to someone who has been forgiven and forgiven himself, how can we be part of capturing that change so that lessons can be learned for the world? So that's a lot of what we want to do. It will involve mixed methods. We'll be doing qualitative and quantitative, and it's going to be a long, beautiful journey, I hope, together. And we also fully understand that we are a university from the global north. Like, who are we to have the privilege and honor to be in partnership with Aegis Trust, to be doing this incredibly sensitive work in Rwanda? We fully understand that. And so we are going to be the best we can to be a good partner to them and step up when we can and step back when we need to. So,
As Sir John would say, the humble approach.
And for me, one of the things that amazed me when even you came with your team was having someone from the University of Rwanda as part of your team. And that spoke volumes to me, because it's no longer, I'm looking at you, sir, you know who you are. and you know, your team coming in and you're like, all right, we've come with these measurements, but you're not only coming from the global north, we're also involving the universities where you are to make sure that we capture that. And then that talking between us, that understanding, that part of where people come in and say, you know, this is who we are, this is what we know, but could you tell us more? Should we learn from you? What is the impact? What are you trying to achieve? How are you even measuring forgiveness? What's the journey that you've taken? How are you doing that? So all putting those measures in place, but even us looking at ourselves, we're like, oh, we have not thought about that. That would be an angle that, you know, would take us to understanding even more of our work, even the more of the impact, because there is more impact than we actually know, yet it is there. So I think that is a good thing, and yeah, like that, yeah.
With 10 minutes left, we thought we would do some Q&A because we've laid a lot out really quickly, a lot of different areas that could be their own presentations. Jenna, are you doing the microphone? Thank you. Jenna, our volunteer, will shepherd the microphone along. Any and all questions, please.
Hi. Okay, my name is Princess. My question will be directed to compassion. So you made mention that it's faith-based and through the church. And I'm aware that there are like different Christian denominations in Rwanda. So I was just curious on how, are you using the same approach for all? And then I think there is about 2-3% of Muslims. And I was just also wondering if there was a kind of inclusion or for Muslims or atheists or, you know, young people. And I would like you to, again, just elaborate a little bit on what you do exactly with the youth, because, I mean, I heard all of the theoretical and how, but I didn't hear specifically how it narrows down to the youth and possibly what the outcomes are. Maybe I wasn't paying so much attention, but thank you.
Well, thank you so much for that question. Specifically, we work with what we call evangelical churches. And with evangelical churches, they don't include Catholics, Seventh-day Adventists, Jehovah's Witnesses, Muslims. They are basically Protestant-oriented denominations. And that means Protestants, Baptists, Presbyterians, Methodists, and Pentecostals. And other denominations that are along that line. There are so many, the Holiness Movement, and names keep coming up every now and then. But the basis is there must be evangelical churches. And then our model is that it is church-based, it is Christ-centered, and it is child-focused. So with child-focused, it means our interventions are directed. So it is church-based, that's where I want to begin from. Compassion does partnership with the church, and then we agree on how many children they should register for that, and the criteria is set for the kind of children they need to register. Number one, they have to be from poor families, and there is a measurement of poverty in Rwanda. You are either in category 1 or 2, 3 or 4. Now, for us, ours goes for 1 and 2, because those are the most deprived ones. And then other criteria is that that family where that child is from must be within 3 kilometers from the church that is registering. Why is that? Because there are specific programs that the child needs to attend at the specific church. And it would be wrong to register somebody who is 10 kilometers away from the church. Basically, he will not be able to attend church programs. And then it is Christ-centered. How is that? That any program and interventions that we do it in Jesus' name. That's kind of... now I don't want to go deep into that because I will end up speaking for long. As a preacher, as an evangelical person, I will keep you here. But what that means is that all the interventions that we do them around for the glory of Jesus. Now, why the church? Why did Compassion choose the church as a way of reaching out to the community? Why? Compassion believes that the church is God's instrument in the community. We believe that there are specific human needs that can only be addressed when a person is introduced to a relationship with Jesus. There are others that you can do by designing interventions, but there are other human needs. Again, I don't want to go. We have done 10 minutes. I don't know how many minutes that we have. Because we believe a human being is not just this person we see. A human being is made up of a spirit, soul, and a body. And for you to minister to that person holistically, you need to address all those 3. Time. I'm sorry.
So to add to that,
we can continue the conversation.
so to add to that, although as Compassion takes the church partner and the faith-based route, even in our data sets of those beneficiaries, those children that are benefiting from Compassion programs, they don't discriminate. We have a percentage of Muslim children, all the different denominations. So the programs themselves, although faith-based, are not, there's not a faith criteria to participate in the program. So they partner with the churches as frontline partners, but the community is served as a whole based on that approach. I know Mark wanted to share a bit about the Aegis program as well.
Yeah, on the contrary, for us, we bring in everyone. So yes, they also bring in everyone, but we're not just working with a specific church, we're working with everyone. That's what I wanted to allude to. And for us, it's about values, what we call values, and those will be empathy, critical thinking, and personal responsibility, with the aim that these will build a community and then love and then build peace overall. So you talked about youth, and for us, we have trainings, and from trainings, going back to the 3 C's, from the trainings, we're going to have mentorship that follows, and that mentorship, we also want them to create a project. And why is that? We believe that the impact they're going to have will not come from just hearing, but doing what they learned in the community. So by them starting their own projects within the community that they live in, not only gives them the deeper knowledge of what they're doing, but also it makes it easy for us to mentor them, because now they're doing something different within the community. So, and that model, we also have it for teachers, we also have it for decision makers, and now that they're doing those different works, we usually bring them for roundtable discussions where we have leaders, them, church members, and different people on roundtable discussions to even go deeper, because now they actually know the actual issues. And those projects, they come up with them where they see what's the problem in the community, and they come up with a solution as a project within the community. So those are the works, and I'm seeing someone next to you because he went through the training. He was nodding like this, pretty much because he's done those projects. So for more details, please. Yes.
Yeah, so just a final question. So, I mean, I used to be a project manager and no more, but I'm just curious, how do you draw the line between what the funders want as their outcome or their indicators versus how it doesn't necessarily maybe align with what you think should be the outcome. But at the same time, because the funders have certain expectations, you have to fit in. How do you, because I used to have that challenge of these indicators don't work, these outcomes are not realistic, but you would hear them say, oh, this is what the funding partners want us to do. But you know that not only it is not necessarily impactful, but you don't see the value of it in the long term to the beneficiaries. So how do you, fill up that thin line?
So I started talking about trust with the researchers and the practitioners. With Compassion International, in our trust building process, we developed a memorandum of understanding, for instance. And Compassion was the major funder for this partnership that's now in its 9th year. Because Compassion as an institution wanted to build one of their programs to be theory predicated and evidence-based, not just ideologically driven or faith-driven. They want to make sure that their faith-driven programs were based in theory and evidence. We had an agreement from the beginning that we would publish findings even if they were negative. So for instance, in El Salvador, there were some project sites that were not performing as well as the comparison group. We had from the beginning an agreement that we're not a mouthpiece for the organization. We're here to support the organization and to promote the organization in the scientific literature, for instance, but the data are the data, and we will present the lessons learned from those data. I know your question is a bit more complicated and nuanced than that. I'm getting told that we are at time, but it again goes back to that trust building and having that, the agreement from the get-go. I know Jonathan wanted to ask about trust across the partners and how you can protect each other's interests and so forth. He's wavering. Maybe we can talk afterward. But I think it goes again back to the trust, to the relationship building and the trust there. Even with, for instance, Templeton World Charity Foundation, who's a funder of this new partnership, there's the aligned goals and values, but because TWCF is interested in promoting good science, they're not going to censor some findings to promote some others. So it's a matter of taking the time to get that trust, to know that you can trust the funder and trust the funder to trust you, if that makes sense. But thank you for that good question, and thank you for keeping us on time. Pretty good.